Imagine an army so vast that if you stood at its very back, you might never see where it begins. Now, imagine that this army isn't just a line of soldiers. It's an entire city on the move, a city alive with activity, smoke rising from cooking, fires, tents being packed at first light, medics tending to wounds, engineers hauling tools, and even merchants selling bread and wine along the march. In this video, we'll take you inside this moving machine, the Roman legion on the march. Step by step, hour by hour, and by the end, you might wonder, could I even survive a single day walking alongside the soldiers of Rome? Before we explore how a Roman march actually worked, we need to confront the numbers, and they are staggering. During the High Empire, a typical campaign force could include 2 full legions, roughly 13,000 to 14,000 highly trained legionaries. But they weren't marching alone. Alongside them were 5,000 to 6,000 auxiliary troops, Numidian cavalry, Syrian archers, Germanic infantry, and slingers from Hispania. These were soldiers who weren't Roman citizens, but fought for Rome in exchange for pay and the promise of citizenship. Right there, we're talking about nearly 20,000 armed men, and that's just the fighters. Behind the scenes, there were 3,000 to 4,000 cooks, slaves, servants, and military laborers. They cared for the mules, prepared food, repaired weapons, set up tents, and transported heavy equipment. Some were part of the army itself. Others belonged to senior officers. Now, consider the animals. A marching army could bring along between 4,500 and 5,000 mules, plus horses for officers, cavalrymen, and messengers. Each animal could carry up to 130 kilograms of supplies, gear, wood, stakes, rations, siege tools, even dismantled catapults. Add it all up, and you have a force of 25,000 to 30,000 living beings on the move. Men, horses, mules, oxen, carts, and weapons. And this doesn't even count civilian merchants, local guides, or temporary messengers traveling between villages and forts. The historian Polybius described the legion's march as a moving wall of flesh, and he wasn't exaggerating. A marching legion could stretch 8 to 12 kilometers along the road. As Eugenius warned, on the Roman march, formation mattered more than courage in battle. The front of the column might be crossing a river while the rear was still breaking down. Tents from the night before. Managing an army of this scale was a serious challenge. How do you move such a massive force every single day without it falling apart? To understand, let's start with a Roman morning. The march began while the world was still asleep, between 3 and 4 in the morning, during the 4th watch of the night. The first sound wasn't swords clashing or orders shouted, but the soft gallop of horses. These belonged to the speculatories, the legion's elite scouts. Their job went beyond reconnaissance. They moved ahead of the column to spot ambushes, track enemy activity, evaluate routes, and check suspicious villages. They left before sunrise with one purpose: to ensure nothing could stop the Roman army's advance. Back at camp, centurions woke their men with a short blast from the cornu. Everything was organized. Nothing was left to chance. Each contubernium. The basic group of 8 legionaries dismantled their leather tent, packed their equipment, checked their weapons, tightened armor belts, and inspected their sandals. Every soldier carried his own world on his back. Roman legions did not use wagons for personal gear. Each man marched with 20 to 30 kilos of supplies, his gladius, shield, javelins, cooking tools, 3 days of dry rations, stakes for fortifications, and digging tools. They weren't just fighters, they were builders, carriers, and mobile laborers of war. Meanwhile, the high command convened to review intelligence from the night before. The legatus legionis, military tribunes, and chief engineers examined reports from messengers and scouts. Together, they chose the day's route, avoiding marshes, rocky hills, and areas vulnerable to ambush. The top priority was simple but vital: Keep the march moving smoothly and predictably, but never let it become vulnerable. At the same hour, the animals were being prepared. Mules were fed, carts were checked, and the impedimenta, the supply, train, was organized with the same strict discipline as the soldiers themselves. Any mistake here could bring the entire column to a standstill. Just before sunrise, the head of the column was already on the move. The sound was minimal, almost eerie. Discipline was absolute. Soldiers marched in silence, no talking out of turn, no laughing, no singing. The reason was straightforward. No one should know that Rome was coming until it was too late. At the very front, where danger and the unknown waited, moved the vanguard. This wasn't a random group of scouts. It was a specialized hybrid force, built to be fast, reactive, and deadly. Rome knew that a surprise attack could destroy an entire marching column if information didn't reach the main body in time. The vanguard was made up of elite auxiliary units, seasoned non-Roman soldiers recruited from some of the fiercest peoples of the empire. Numidians and Thracians formed the light cavalry, masters of rapid maneuvers across rough terrain. Gauls brought their hunting instincts and tracking skills. Cretans and Syrians wielded long-range bows. Light infantry supported them, lightly armed and barely burdened, ready to strike, run, or retreat at a moment's notice. Their mission was clear: keep the road safe before the main army arrived. That meant confronting tribal ambushes, disarming, traps made from logs, hidden pits, or buried spikes, inspecting silent villages for potential threats, and skirmishing with enemy scouts when necessary. But the vanguard had another critical role. It served as the army's warning system. In dense regions like Germania, where thick forests limited visibility, the vanguard could be as far as 3 kilometers ahead of the main body. This gap was essential. It allowed forward units to send alerts, request reinforcements, or retreat if needed, without causing panic or disorder in the main column. Writers like Vigius and Tacitus emphasized how important this structure was. Losing the vanguard on a long, stretched-out march could lead to chaos, panic, and certain death for the legion. It was the army's first line of defense, and the most fragile. That's why Rome never assigned just anyone to this position. The men chosen were seasoned veterans, often hardened by decades of campaigns. They had the authority to make split-second decisions and knew they were the first to enter dangerous territory. If they failed, no one else could fix it. Directly behind the vanguard moved another group of quiet but decisive figures: the agrimensors, the military surveyors. Armed with simple tools like the groma and korobits, their work could determine the success or failure of the entire campaign. These trained topographers could turn any terrain into a fortress. Even before the first tent was pitched or the first shield laid on the ground, the agrimensors had already mapped the exact location where the legion would camp that night. Using stakes, ropes, and solar alignments, they marked the boundaries of the castrum, the fortified camp built at the end of each day. There was no room for error. The site had to meet near-perfect standards: a clean water source nearby, solid, well-drained ground, an elevated position for visibility, access to wood and stone for fortifications, and, if possible, an open field to deploy troops if battle broke out. All of this had to be decided hours before the first legionary arrived. Without a ready camp, a legion stalled on the march was a perfect target. Marching just behind the surveyors was the command center, the brain of the legion. The legatus. Legiones, the highest-ranking officer of the legion, didn't walk among the regular troops or sit safely at the rear. He occupied a strategic spot, isolated but within reach, surrounded by his personal guard, military tribunes, and a small team of administrative officers. From here, every decision was made: changes to the route, responses to scout reports, and adjustments for terrain, weather, or enemy activity. Orders flowed outward like lifeblood. Horse messengers, the cursaries, raced from the commander's post to the front lines, flanks, and rear, carrying coded instructions. Everything had to be executed with absolute precision, silently and without hesitation. Military writers like Frontinus, in his Sarda Gamata, described how the choice of campsite could make or break an entire campaign. A poorly drained field could turn to swamp after one night of rain. A neglected hill could become a perfect vantage point for the enemy. A shallow river might fail to protect a flank. The Romans understood all of this. What's most remarkable is that none of this was exceptional. It was routine. Every detail, every movement, every march was performed daily with meticulous care, as if every step of war had been prescripted from the first movement. Then came the heart of it. The main body, the beating soul of the legion. Here marched the veteran legionaries, fresh recruits still in training, the stake carriers, tool-bearers, men who quite literally carried Rome on their shoulders. This core force numbered about 13,000 legionaries, organized into 10 cohorts per legion, each cohort subdivided into centuries of 80 men. Alongside them moved thousands more. Military servants, slaves, and animal handlers, roughly 4,000 people, and thousands of mules, each carrying up to 830 kilograms of essential equipment. But what made this mass truly impressive wasn't just its size. It was the discipline with which it moved. The Roman march was executed with precision comparable to modern military logistics. Each century knew its exact place in the column. Veteran soldiers led the front to set the pace. New recruits marched in the middle, surrounded by experienced soldiers to prevent disorder. The troublemakers were placed at the rear, where they could be closely monitored. The column didn't march in battle formation. Instead, it moved as a narrow column, 2 or 3 men wide, adapted to the terrain. This allowed the legion to snake through valleys, narrow trails, ancient roads, and mountainous regions without losing cohesion. Mounted messengers relayed orders along the column, while trumpets and cornublasts signaled changes in pace, halts, or alerts. One essential factor held it all together: weight. Each soldier carried 20 to 30 kilos of gear. This included his armor, typically a lorica segmentata or chainmail, his scutum shield, gladius sword, pilum javelin, wooden stakes for fortifications, a shovel, cooking pot, water flask, spare clothing, dry rations, and personal cooking utensils. The Romans called this load muli Mariani, Marius's mules, a name dating back to when Consul Gaius Marius reformed the army and made personal gear transport central to the legion's design. The daily march covered 20 to 30 kilometers, an average considered sacred. March too far, and soldiers would be exhausted and vulnerable. March too little, and the campaign slowed, exposing the army to risk. The pace was calculated, the effort carefully distributed. The legion never rushed. It advanced steadily. If a soldier collapsed, the rule was simple: help him if terrain and distance allowed. If not, he was left behind. Efficiency always came before compassion. Behind this living wall of men followed the one element no general could afford to ignore: the baggage train. Essential for sustaining the legion far from home, the baggage train, or impedimenta, was also its weakest point, yet it was far from an afterthought. This long line of carts, animals, and servants was the army's logistical heart. It carried grain and salt, barrels of vinegar, construction tools, dismantled artillery, scrolls with maps and orders, spare tents, skins, cloaks, footwear, medicine, blankets, everything needed to keep the legion operational for weeks without outside support. The baggage train was a world of its own, made up of hundreds of mules and oxen, each carefully loaded with essential supplies. The carts were reinforced with thick wood, double wheels, and leather-bound axles, guided by experienced handlers. Some were enslaved, others hired, and many had served the same legion for years. They knew the routine by heart and, in practice, were treated as an integral part of the army. Despite its importance, the train moved slowly, painfully slowly. Its placement in the column was therefore strategic, usually in the center or just behind the main body, protected by the rear guard and flanked by mobile patrols. A single mishap, a broken cart, an injured mule, a lost load, could bring the whole march to a halt. Historian Josephus, writing about Titus's campaigns in Judea, noted that rules for the impedimenta were almost as strict as the laws of combat. No cargo could be removed without permission, no cart left behind. Disorganization was punished immediately, sometimes with physical penalties. The train also carried critical personnel, medics with surgical kits, cooks with portable mills and kettles, campaign blacksmiths, scribes, and interpreters. Backup animals, extra horses and mules, were always on hand in case key beasts were lost. Protecting this train was so vital that in hostile territory, entire detachments of light infantry and auxiliary cavalry were assigned solely for its defense. Without the train, the legion couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't fight. What was once the world's most disciplined army would become a starving, vulnerable crowd. If the vanguard was the eyes and the baggage train the heart, then the rear guard was the invisible shield, holding the legion together from behind. In Roman doctrine, marching at the rear was not punishment. It was a responsibility that required calm, steady discipline. The rear guard was made up of rotating units, auxiliary archers, light cavalry, and infantry. These were seasoned soldiers accustomed to constant vigilance and aware that danger often came from behind. They protected the baggage train, gathered stragglers, monitored the flanks in low visibility zones, and reacted instantly to any attack from the rear. The threat wasn't only tactical, it was psychological. Even a small attack from behind could spark panic. A rumor among servants or auxiliaries, a scream in the wrong place, a misinterpreted horn blast, any of these could set the column into chaos. That's why the rear guard was disciplined and regularly rotated. Its units were swapped frequently to keep focus and morale high. The rear guard also enforced order. Deserters attempting to slip away at the tail of the column were caught, and during critical campaigns, often executed on the spot. Discipline didn't end when a soldier left formation. It followed him to his last step. History had taught Rome brutal lessons. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD was the deadliest example. 3 legions, led by Publius Quintilius Varus, were annihilated by Germanic tribes through attacks on their sides and rear. The lack of coordination between the vanguard and rear guard, combined with dense terrain and an overextended column, left no room for an organized response. It was the worst military disaster of the High Empire, and a logistical shock that forever changed Roman doctrine. From then on, rear guards became stronger and more proactive. They didn't just defend, they anticipated. In hostile regions, they were reinforced with lateral patrols, messengers, and engineers. While the rear guard secured the back, flanks remained vulnerable. Along the edges of the column moved another specialized group, the flank guard. They disappeared into brush, climbed hills, and appeared where no one expected. If the eyes of the legion were at the front and the shield at the rear, then the flanks were the constant weak spot of a line stretching more than 10 kilometers. To guard these sides, Rome relied on mobile, adaptable patrols. These men moved, parallel to the main column, cutting through forests, scaling hills, scouting side trails, descending ravines, and slipping into villages along the route. Their mission was to watch without being seen, spot threats before they became deadly, and strike fast when necessary to neutralize danger before it reached the main body. The flank guard was mostly composed of light auxiliary cavalry, Numidians, Thracians, and Iberians, mounted on horses trained for rugged terrain. They were supported by light infantry carrying minimal gear, ready for ambushes and pursuits through dense woodland. In regions like Germania or Dacia, Rome even recruited local scouts, native allies who knew the land better than anyone and could predict where enemies were likely to strike. Their work demanded more endurance than any other unit in the legion. They marched farther, slept less, ate poorly, yet had to stay alert and make instant decisions. These soldiers didn't just protect the sides of the column, they protected its strategic integrity. Accounts from Caesar's campaigns in Gaul show how experienced flankers prevented ambushes in mountainous terrain, where local tribes waited at sharp bends in the trail. In Britannia, entire detachments were often sent ahead to scout both sides of a valley before the main column advanced. One failure by a flanker didn't just risk one life, it could open a gap kilometers wide. That's why these roles were reserved for veterans, soldiers with initiative, knowledge of the terrain, and the ability to act independently. At the edges of the legion, there was no immediate command, no trumpet signaling orders, only silence, trees, and constant danger. But all this vigilance meant nothing if, at the end of the day, the legion couldn't stop safely. That required the most exhausting and repetitive task of the entire march, building a fortified camp from scratch before nightfall. As the legion approached the site previously marked by the agrimensors, it transformed into an organized military construction force. Every man knew his task. Every group had done it dozens, if not hundreds of times. Nothing was improvised. Nothing was left to chance. The process always started with the ditch, a defensive trench dug around the perimeter, usually 2 meters deep and 3 meters wide. The earth removed was thrown inward, forming a mound ready to hold the wooden stakes carried by every legionary. These stakes, called valli, were part of the standard equipment. No campaign ever took place without them. Next, the 4 main gates were set, the Porta Praetoria at the front, the Porta Decumana at the rear, and the lateral gates, Sinistra and Dextra. Guards were stationed immediately, even before walls were completed. Inside, the legion divided itself into quadrants. Tents were pitched according to strict hierarchy, officers in the center, regular troops on the flanks, auxiliaries in designated sectors, and baggage animals in clearly marked zones. At the center stood the praetorium, the commander's tent, where a portable altar was set up. Sacrifices were made, omens read, and high command meetings held. Streets within the camp followed a precise layout, perpendicular lines wide enough for troops to move quickly, with warehouses, kitchens, and even latrines clearly designated. The astonishing part: all of this was completed in under 4 hours. Writers like Vegetius and Josephus emphasized that Rome's ability to transform any open field into a fully functional fortress was one of its greatest advantages. While enemies slept exposed, the legion rested behind walls, armed, supplied with escape routes and internal signals already prepared. Fortification wasn't optional. Even for a single night, even in seemingly safe territory, building the camp was doctrine, part of the legion's identity. This system allowed Rome to advance without relying on cities, forts, or allied shelters. The legion carried its own city. When the last stake was driven, the final tent pitched, and watches assigned, silence fell over the camp. But for the Romans, night wasn't rest. It was a new operational phase. Each contubernium received its ration: raw grains, salt, vinegar, and dried meat if available. Soldiers cooked by discreet fires, keeping flames low to avoid detection. They ground wheat using portable mills and prepared thick porridge called pools. Sometimes they mixed vinegar and salt with water to make posca, a sour drink common among soldiers. At the same time, medics treated the wounded, cleaning cuts, setting splints, and applying honey and vinegar ointments. Animals were brushed, fed, and watered. Any damaged carts, harnesses, or gear were repaired immediately because nothing could delay the next day's march. Orders for the next day were read aloud. Centurions received instructions directly from tribunes who had just come from the praetorium. Punishments were announced, warnings given, and executions carried out when necessary, calmly, as a reminder that discipline never slept. Silence was strict. No laughing, no music, no loud conversation. Even footsteps were muffled. The enemy might be listening, and order had to be maintained. Night patrols were precise. Each century received the day's password, or tessera. 2. Present at checkpoints during 3-hour staggered shifts. Falling asleep on watch carried the ultimate penalty, death by stoning, carried out by the soldier's own contubernium. Brutal, yes, but it ensured no one ever forgot the stakes. Even at rest, soldiers kept their shields within reach, their gladius at their side, and sandals ready. If attacked, every soldier knew exactly where to run, which gate to defend, and which formation to take. The legion was never caught off guard. It was always the one delivering the surprise. After 24 hours, what seemed like a simple march revealed itself as a flawless choreography of survival, strategy, and control of time and space. The Roman legion wasn't just soldiers. It was planning, discipline, and doctrine, capable of turning hostile terrain into an extension of the empire. It was at once a machine, a living body, and a city, marching like a mechanism, breathing like a living being, and rising like a fortress every single day. And now that you've walked beside it for a day, ask yourself, could you survive this? Routine for a week? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. And, as always, may Mars guide you in battle.